The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
The Chargers officially released Joey Bosa on Wednesday.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, Daniel, the writing was on the wall, and now the chickens have officially come home to roost on Joey Bosa being released by the Chargers. It just was a move that made too much sense from a financial standpoint, and now it actually has happened. Now, we're also going to take a look at some of the bigger defensive free agents. In case they can't bring back Khalil Mack, there's a couple of options that they could look at there, and a pretty loaded cornerback group. A lot of options to like there.
Yeah, and a lot of people are talking about the offensive free agents, and that'll be a focus for the Chargers going into free agency. But there are a lot of defensive guys that make a ton of sense as well. But let's start with the biggest news of the day, which we thought was going to be DK Metcalf rumors, but ended up being the Chargers releasing Joey Bosa, which isn't a surprise. We all kind of, at least me and you had stayed pretty consistent during this offseason that there was just no way the Chargers were going to be able to bring back Joey Bosa at a $36+ million salary cap hit, really no matter what ended up happening with Khalil Mack. But we talked about it this week with the roster bonus coming up on the 3rd day of the new league year. There was just no way for them to try to hold on to him and see if a trade could work out or anything else without having to pay a player that probably wasn't going to be on the roster in 2025. And he leaves behind kind of a checkered legacy with the Chargers and someone who never really felt like he filled his full potential. I mean, that'll always kind of be the story of what Joey Bosa, what his legacy with the Chargers is. But it's crazy, man. Like, the last San Diego Charger, obviously we'll see what happens with Denzel Perryman, but Joey Bosa's been with the Chargers since he was drafted as a San Diego Charger. Obviously it means something to us as San Diego guys. Another part of it too is, man, like our first ever episode of Chargers Domination Live was about the Joey Bosa holdout. Like, wow. and Derek Togerson of NBC in San Diego and having his daughter say, "Sign the contract, Joey," at the very end of it. So it's crazy that his Chargers career has basically been our podcast career. Yeah. But as far as them making this move now, like you said, it financially didn't make sense to keep him on the roster. Now you free up $25+ million in salary cap space, giving the Chargers close to $90 million overall, which puts them in a good position going into the offseason. Now, there's other things that had to be done, but this was, like you said, the writing was on the wall. This had to happen, as unfortunate as an ending it might be for him.
Yeah, this is the not so nice part of the NFL, the business part, because, I know Joe Ortiz went up there at the combine and said, "Hey, we want Joey Bosa to retire a Charger," but while also knowing that there's just no way that was going to happen. And so this was a move that we expected to happen, and I think it was something that all Charger fans after the fact are trying to appreciate a little bit, what Joey Bosa has brought to the Chargers. And, hey, a lot of expectations coming in as a third overall pick in the first round. And, hey, you look at the numbers, he is second all-time in Chargers history in sacks behind Leslie O'Neal. That is it. It is a very, he is in rarefied air for sure. And even with me saying that, it still feels like he did not come close to realizing his potential, because when Joey Bosa was right, when Joey Bosa was healthy, he was absolutely one of the most disruptive defensive players in the NFL. The unfortunate part of that is it was just way too far and few between. Joey Bosa dealt with a unbelievable amount of injuries in his NFL career. Some very, very serious injuries, some very painful injuries. And I think, in the last year that he was with the Chargers, he did his absolute best to fight through those injuries, to be able to give his team everything that he possibly could, including a pay cut, to stay with the team. But unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. And the production wasn't there, and it did not meet the amount of money that he was going to make. So this was something that had to happen. And now the Chargers have to plan for life after Joey Bosa.
Yeah, and I think the hard thing is they weren't really ready to be in this spot, at least as it concerns losing Joey Bosa and potentially Khalil Mack. But yeah, I mean, Joey Bosa was one of the top defensive players in the NFL at his best, and it's the reason at one point he was made the highest paid defensive player in the NFL and had a record-setting edge rusher contract. But over the last 3 years, he never eclipsed 6.5 sacks. Like, that just was what it was. And even last year in playing 14 games, while trying to do it banged up, he only had 5 sacks. And it's just not, like, he would have to literally be putting up triple what he did last year to command the salary that he's going to have. And like I said at the beginning of the show, a true Hall of Fame type of talent. Like, you can't even really say he's a bust from a talent standpoint. He was as good as you thought that he was. Yeah. He was just never able to stay on the field. And I mean, it ends up being 41 games that he missed over 9 seasons. And he only played in 16 plus games 3 times in those 9 years. And only 2 of those were full seasons before it ended up going to a 17 game season. So it was also a turbulent ride, right? Like, held out as a rookie. And still ended up winning Rookie of the Year, Defensive Rookie of the Year. Had the incident with the Philadelphia fans watching his brother play, had the incident in the Jaguars game where he's slamming his helmet and costing the team in that way. I know a lot of fans had issues, with the offsides penalties and all that, which comes with great pass rushers all the time, right? Sure. But I think at the end of the day, it's like everyone thinks of Sean Merriman as like the dude for the Chargers, and like he's like 8th on the list of Chargers career sack leaders, right? Like, Joey Bosa almost doubled the amount of sacks that Sean Merriman had. And a similarly, injured, never really kind of lived up to what he could have fully been. Had a few very, very good seasons. But maybe with time we'll look back on Joey Bosa in a different light. And I hope that we do, because he was a really, really good player at one point. There was just no way to argue to bring him back at the number he was at. I mean, you look at it, and just to show you kind of how much injuries played an impact, his 17-game average for his career was 11.4 sacks. That's a Hall of Fame player. You do that for 10 plus years, potentially, right? You're getting over 100 sacks in your career. So, injuries kind of robbed us of seeing what that true potential was. But now you have to look to the future, where the Chargers now have $90 million or about that in salary cap space.
Cha-ching.
And the big thing that kind of comes from this is just kind of putting even more importance on bringing Khalil Mack back. And I think it kind of begs the question, like, does this change what's happening with Khalil Mack? Do the Chargers feel better about signing Khalil Mack back to the team when they make this move? Because we all know now, with only Tulu Tuipulotu and Bud Dupree as your edge rushers on the roster, bringing him back now is as important as ever.
Yeah, it's got to be at paramount level of importance, because if you don't get that done, then that edge room is looking really thin, and then alarm bells should be going off. The emergency sounds, the sirens should be going, and they are very, very loud if you are not able to bring back Khalil Mack. And it's because Khalil Mack, even at his age, is still incredibly important and very productive for the defense. And a great run defender, still a very, very powerful and disruptive pass rusher as well. Khalil Mack definitely has to get re-signed. And also, I think now with the extra money, the extra cap space, you can feel very confident that the Chargers have the money to be able to bring him back and to still be able to upgrade around and be able to spend money on addressing other holes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you tried to run it back with Joey Bosa making $36 million and then sign Khalil Mack to 22 to 25 million, that really kind of hinders how much you could have a chance to improve the defense going into 2025 outside of the draft picks that you have. So as important as ever now, bring Khalil Mack back. He is a well-rounded player. You don't really have the heir apparent to both of these guys in the building right now as highly as you can think of someone like a Tuli Tuipulotu. Bring him back. Go get, playing for the future now. Draft a guy that could potentially take over, but this team is not ready to lose Khalil Mack yet. And losing Bosa and Mack would be a really, really hard thing to overcome, I think, in this offseason.
Sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Tonight, I'm looking at a ridiculous point spread in the Celtics-Sixers matchup. Boston beat Philly by 20 the last time they met. And FanDuel has taken note. FanDuel has the Celtics by 13.5 right now. New FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Joey Bosa has been released by the Los Angeles Chargers. The team announced late Wednesday night. The Chargers will save over $25 million against the cap by
getting their star, Maxx Crosby, under contract for the foreseeable future.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast.
Adam Schefter tweeted out, the Raiders are signing Pro Bowl defensive end Maxx Crosby to a 3-year, $106.5 million extension. That includes $91.5 million guaranteed, making him the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Also, for the third time in 4 years, the Raiders are addressing the contract of their cornerstone player, this time cementing his relationship with the Raiders for the foreseeable future. So, really good news. We knew that was a storyline going into the offseason. We've talked about it. Max has talked about it. We knew that it was something, right? He has 2 years left on his deal, but he had no guaranteed money. So at some point, that had to be addressed. The good thing about this is not only is it a 3-year contract extension, but as Team PR reached out to us and let us know that it also goes with the 2 years that he still had left on his deal. So he's tied with the Raiders for the next 5 seasons, which I think is great. 27 years old. He'll turn 28 in August. He'll be 32, 33 years old when this contract is set to expire. So I think that that's great news. A lot of people on my radio show called in on Wednesday and said, man, this is the exact opposite of September 1st, 2018, when the Raiders made the move to trade Khalil Mack to the Chicago Bears that Saturday morning. And I remember it like it was yesterday, especially here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. And you can go back and check. September 1st, 2018. It was a Saturday. It was a special emergency podcast that I did. I was livid. And I mean livid when John Gruden traded away Khalil Mack for draft picks to the Chicago Bears. And the funny thing about that is it goes full circle because in that episode, and again, you can go back and listen. Again, September 1st, 2018. I said what John Gruden did is the same thing that Pete Carroll did in the Super Bowl, which is funny because now Pete Carroll's the head coach of the Raiders. And I said Pete Carroll didn't give Marshawn Lynch the ball at the goal line because he didn't want him to score the touchdown and be the MVP of the game and be the face of the Seattle Seahawks. He wanted that to be Russell Wilson, so he was going to throw the touchdown pass. And I said John Gruden didn't want Khalil Mack to be the face of the franchise because he wanted it to be the quarterback because he's an offensive-minded guy. So that's how I kind of tied it all together. But it's funny, it comes full circle now. Pete Carroll is the head coach of the Silver and Black, and they do get their guy, their defensive-minded guy, Maxx Crosby, the leader of the organization. They get him tied up and under contract for the foreseeable future, which is excellent news for Raiders. It's excellent news for Raider Nation. It's excellent news for Maxx Crosby. And, oh, by the way, well earned. Does he know that there's more that he has to do? Absolutely. Is there things that he hasn't checked on, the boxes he hasn't checked yet in his career? Yep. But the one thing we know about Max, the money didn't change the way he worked after he got his first contract extension. So I doubt that the money is going to change the way he works after this contract extension. I'm sure he's going to continue to be the same guy that he's always been. That's why you feel confident when a guy like that gets paid. So shout out to Maxx Crosby for getting that contract extension. Also, on a lighter note, the Raiders signed Alex Kappa. He's a guard to a 2-year deal. He was a member of the Cincinnati Bengals. He just got released not too long ago. Matter of fact, earlier this week or late last week, he got released. The Raiders signed him. They made it official to a 2-year deal. He's going to be some more offensive line depth at the very least. He was in Cincinnati and also Tampa Bay. So John Spytek, Tom Brady, very familiar with Alex Kappa. He did not have a great year last year. He was not good in pass protection. Not going to try to, sugarcoat it or dress it up and make it act like it's the best signing ever. But a 2-year, $11.5 million deal with $5 million guaranteed or a little bit over $5 million guaranteed, that's fine, right? Again, at the very end of the day, it's depth. So that was made official. Maxx Crosby is made official. Also, the Raiders signed Jordan Meredith. This has not been made official by the team yet. This is actually coming from Tristan Kuhn by way of Twitter. The Raiders assigned Jordan Meredith to a 1-year, $1.5 million restricted free agent contract. Meredith allowed 0 sacks and 9 pressures across 575 snaps while being graded as a top 10 guard per PFF. I just think that's really good. Jordan Meredith ended up being a player that, many people didn't think he was going to be, right? Many people didn't think he was going to be such a key cog on that offensive line. He did really well. So I think that was good. Again, he was going to be an exclusive rights, I should have said exclusive right free agent. And the Raiders got him under contract for 1 year, similar to what they did with cornerback Sam Webb. Also, we found out on Wednesday, there's still more. We found out that Gardner Minshew was going to get released, or is going to get released next week when the new league year opens up. It's not a surprise to anybody. Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network tweeted out, the Raiders informed quarterback Gardner Minshew they'll release him when the new league year begins next Wednesday. Minshew has 46 career starts and still only 28 years old, an experience option available. And then also releasing Minshew will save about $6.34 million in cap space, $7.6 million in dead money for the Raiders, and then $9.3 million cap space saved if they designate him as a post June 1st release. I don't think there's any reason to do that. Just go ahead and take it, eat it. They've got plenty of cap space, so just go ahead and just make the release official, get it done with this year, and they don't have anything else to worry about. So again, not a big surprise. We all knew that Gardner Minshew was going to get released. So really, that just leaves Carter Bradley and Aiden O'Connell as the current quarterbacks on the Raiders roster. Obviously, that's going to change. And also, my final piece of news and notes that I have for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast doesn't have anything to do with the Raiders directly. But as we saw when Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler were part of the organization, everyone with New England ties ended up either being with the Raiders or they were, kind of easily tied to the Raiders. So definitely want to make sure I pass this along. A couple pieces of news coming out of Seattle on Wednesday. One, Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf requested a trade. The request came on Wednesday after a series of conversations over the past 2 weeks. Metcalf prefers a contender. So that's that. So, of course, a lot of people are thinking, well, Pete Carroll's in Vegas with the Raiders. The Raiders have a need for a big-time wide receiver, a guy who could be that big-time playmaker, take the top off of defense, go up there and high point a ball. Maybe he'd be a guy that the Raiders would be interested in trading for. So that's out there. Also, we found out on Wednesday that the Seahawks were releasing all-time franchise great wide receiver Tyler Lockett. He piled up over 8,500 receiving yards and 61 touchdowns across 10 seasons in Seattle. The Seahawks are opting to release Lockett rather than pay him his $17 million salary for the season, including a $5.3 million roster bonus that's due on March 16th. So obviously that is some significant news as well. I remember when Tyler Lockett was drafted by the Seattle Seahawks, he came out of Kansas State and he was a really good special teams guy, really good return guy, and turned himself into a really good wide receiver for Seattle. And then Adam Schefter tweeted out, one natural landing spot for soon-to-be former Seahawks wide receiver Tyler Lockett is the Las Vegas Raiders, whose head coach Pete Carroll knows his former wide receiver well. Lockett's character has always matched his talents, and Carroll always been a big supporter. Raiders also need wide receiver help. So just get ready that anyone with Seattle ties is going to immediately be tied to the Raiders. And again, those two guys aren't bad to be tied to anyway, DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett. I know Tyler Lockett, for particular, is a really good locker room dude. He's a guy that understands the culture. He's a guy that understands competition. So those guys are out there. They could become available. Lockett will be available. Seahawks don't have to trade DK just because he requested a trade, but obviously that's an indicator that, hey, he could be available for the right price. What's the right price? Well, I don't know, but he's out there and he's available. And that's just some of the news, right? I mean, I don't really have time to go through every single thing. Like Joey Bosa was released from the Chargers, and no, I don't have any interest in the Raiders going and making a move for him. I mean, there's just so many things that are going on. There's a bunch of rumors and reports. And again, a lot of it is just rumors and reports and just that. But I think that the significant news is what I brought to the table for today's show. But buckle up. Teams are trying to get ready for the new league year. So they're trying to get their books right. They're trying to get their roster right. They're trying to identify whatever holes they have so they can attack free agency the way that they feel like they need to. Coming up next week, again, the legal tampering period starts on Monday.
Sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Tonight, I'm looking at a ridiculous point spread in the Celtics-Sixers matchup. Boston beat Philly by 20 the last time they met. And FanDuel has taken note. FanDuel has the Celtics by 13.5. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Joey Bosa has been released by the Los Angeles Chargers. The team announced late Wednesday night. The Chargers will save over $25 million against the cap by.
It's now looking likely that DK Metcalf will also not be on the Seahawks roster in 2025.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast.
The real bombshell coming moments after Tyler Lockett had been announced as released by the Seahawks. Fellow receiver DK Metcalf reportedly demanding a trade. And I can tell you that this is not a report anymore. This has happened. There has been a trade demand that has been sent in from DK Metcalf and his camp. And if you've been following Locked On Seahawks, you've been following me on the Emerald City Spectrum, look, none of this should come as a surprise. And the way that this has unfolded here the last few weeks, leading up to the Combine, John Schneider, the front office, had opened up some preliminary negotiations with DK Metcalf, who's got 1 year left on his current contract. And the two sides were pretty far apart in terms of what they were wanting. And DK Metcalf looking at that $30 million per year range to be a top 5 paid receiver. The Seahawks were not necessarily keen on the idea of paying that kind of money for a player who's been really good, but not exactly elite. If you look at the stats, Metcalf since 2019 when he came in the league, he's 18th in receptions. He is 12th in receiving yards. He is 5th in receiving touchdowns, but he hasn't been in the top 10 in those two categories, the main receptions, receiving yard categories. And he's had 2 seasons. He hasn't gotten to the 1,000-yard mark. So Seattle's looking at him as a really good receiver, a top 10 caliber receiver, but is he top 5? Do we want to pay that kind of money? So, of course, these negotiations have been going on. And then last week, as I reported on Friday, John Schneider has not been actively shopping DK Metcalf, and I've made that very clear. He was not calling teams trying to move him, but he did answer the phone and talk to a couple of teams, the New England Patriots, a team that desperately need a top receiver for their young quarterback, Drake May. They were looking at Metcalf. There was not a deal there to be had. The pieces were not in place. The Patriots weren't going to trade their number 4 overall pick as part of a deal for Metcalf, and the Seahawks are not necessarily keen on any of their young receivers that they have. The Packers, on the other hand, the discussions got far enough where there was talk about compensation here. Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, the 2 young receivers that were being thrown out there as possibilities along with a high draft pick. Green Bay was wanting to go second rounder. The Seahawks, from my understanding, pick number 23 is what they wanted. And so nothing has happened on that front in terms of finalizing. But these are the steps that we've had up to this point. And now that there's been discussions, and again, it's not actively shopping him, but the fact that there had been discussions and DK Metcalf frustrated about where things are at with the negotiations for a new contract, wanting to play elsewhere. Now you've got this demand for a trade, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to happen. We have seen examples where players, former Washington safety Budda Baker, for example, demanded a trade from the Arizona Cardinals and ended up getting a massive extension, and he's still playing in Arizona. But when you look at the way that this is played out, this feels like this is going to be a really tricky situation for the Seahawks to remedy this problem, because there's other issues at play here as well. The Seahawks were not happy that DK Metcalf's team put this out there today. When Tyler Lockett was released, this day was supposed to be about number 16, and now it isn't going to be, because DK Metcalf ends up getting back in the news here with this demand for a trade. The Seahawks as an organization were not happy about that leaking out. So now you've added that wrinkle to the equation. But really, when you look at the steps here, you've got the negotiations, the two sides not where they want to be, at least at this point, money-wise. And then John Schneider at least answers the phone. He's willing to talk with the Green Bay Packers and the New England Patriots. There's other teams in the periphery. And now you got the Seahawks giving Metcalf permission to seek a trade. Now, some may say, well, there's reports that he wants to go to a contender. Yeah, of course every player wants to be on a contender. The Seahawks are a contender, though. They're a 10-win team. So that isn't necessarily the biggest thing here. Obviously, DK Metcalf's going to be wanting to push for that. But the Seahawks don't have to trade him to the Buffalo Bills or to the Kansas City Chiefs or one of these elite teams. They don't have to trade him to the Philadelphia Eagles to re-team up with A.J. Brown. They can send him to the Tennessee Titans if they want to, because DK Metcalf does not have a no-trade clause. This is not the same as Russell Wilson a few years ago, where Russell Wilson had the ability to dictate where he was going to be going because of that no-trade clause. DK Metcalf does not have that flexibility here. So this is kind of one of those be careful what you wish for type situations where DK Metcalf thinks that there's greener pastures. Be careful what you're wishing for. He's had a really good situation in Seattle. He's had two really good quarterbacks to throw the football to him. He's put up big numbers. And obviously there have been some things going on behind the scenes. And the Seahawks, from my understanding, and this ties into last week as well, they are not going to be just trading DK Metcalf to trade DK Metcalf. They don't have to deal him if they don't want to. If there's not a deal that they like, let's say that teams are lowballing them, third, fourth round pick. Well, Deebo Samuel went for a fifth. DK Metcalf will give a third or fourth. John Schneider is not going to pull the trigger for that type of a return. You could have a situation where DK Metcalf is still on the roster and is doing a hold-in at the beginning of training camp and not participating in the offseason program, and the Seahawks are letting that go on. And obviously you want to avoid those kind of distractions whenever you can. But this is a really good football player who's still in the prime of his career. John Schneider is not going to sell him for peanuts. It has not reached that point. They are going to be looking for the best deal they can get their hands on. If that comes from the Cleveland Browns, if it comes from the Jacksonville Jaguars, if it comes from the Tennessee Titans, then that's where they will trade him to. He does not have the leverage to be able to dictate where he's going to go. Now, if he reaches out to the Raiders, for example, and his former head coach Pete Carroll, and the Raiders come forward and say, you know what, we'll give you pick number 6 if you give us pick number 18. We'll do some pick swapping here. If they come to a deal like that is brought to the table, then maybe DK Metcalf can get traded to somewhere that he wants to be. But he does not have much leverage from that standpoint. John Schneider is the one that is in the driver's seat. So that's the situation that has now been brought upon both sides here. The Seahawks, maybe they're still trying to figure out how can we try to remedy this. DK Metcalf, has it reached a point where he's completely got both feet out the door and there's no going back? I'm getting the sense that that is where we are at this point. Just with the sequence of events that have happened, the dominoes that have fallen to this point, this feels like it's going to be really difficult to come back from. So let's assume that that's the case and that the Seahawks at this stage are not going to be able to get an extension. They're not going to be able to appease DK Metcalf, or both sides just reach the agreement. You know what? This isn't working anymore. We don't want to pay that price tag. You're looking elsewhere. Let's just cut ties. If that does end up being the case, as far as teams that stand out that could be potential fits, I'm still going to list the New England Patriots here. Again, they have the 4th overall pick. The Patriots are not going to be putting that pick out there for DK Metcalf. And that's why John Schneider didn't even continue the conversation last week with them. And the Seahawks do not like the receivers they have. Polk from Washington, you could bring him back to Pacific Northwest, would probably be the best young receiver they could bring in. But the trade packages just are not what John Schneider is looking for to trade a player of this caliber. I think you have to go to the Los Angeles Chargers at pick number 22. That might be the most ideal trade partner at this stage for both parties, because Metcalf spends a lot of time in Southern California. Sanjay Lal is now with the Chargers. He was a Seahawks receivers coach, has a very close relationship with DK Metcalf. There's a lot of factors here that make that one interesting. And Quentin Johnston has had issues with drops. He has not been the player that the Chargers thought he was going to be. But this was a first-round pick that was a really good player at TCU at the college level. He's a bigger-bodied receiver that could win downfield. And the Seahawks, from my knowledge, they were high on him coming out of TCU. Maybe this is a case if a player has a change of scenery. I don't expect that he's going to be DK Metcalf. He hasn't been that caliber of player. But maybe a second-round pick in Johnston, you could get the deal done there. And then Green Bay, that's going to continue to be the team that to me looks to be the front runner here. The Packers want a true number one receiver. Now, Devontae Adams, they can sign without trading anybody. But Devontae Adams is now in the tail end of his career, and Adams wants to play with Aaron Rodgers still. Aaron Rodgers ain't going back to Green Bay. So there may not be a fit there. And the Packers do have a couple young receivers in Wicks and Dubs that the Seahawks liked in the pre-draft process. Maybe a second rounder and one of those guys gets it done. Maybe the Seahawks, if they have enough other offers, can get the Packers to wiggle a little bit and give them a first. Who knows? But Green Bay, to me, is a team that still has the best opportunity to create a package here that John Schneider would be interested in. And the two other teams that I have been told at least have been in the periphery, and I think there will be other teams now sniffing around now that this has gone public, that Metcalf is requesting a trade. Buffalo and Kansas City, the two elite teams in the AFC. Buffalo is potentially going to lose Amari Cooper, who they traded for. He's a free agent. Maybe you can swing a deal with Buffalo for one of their young receivers. They did just extend Khalil Shakir, so I don't see them moving on from him. Can you get him to move Coleman, your first-round pick that you had last year? I don't know if that's going to be doable, but Buffalo is certainly a team that could have some interest because they are clearly in their title window. And in Kansas City, the Chiefs at pick number 31, Kansas City has sniffed around with DK Metcalf before. This is not the first time that they would be trying to get him to play with Patrick Mahomes. Kansas City is a team to keep a close eye on as well. The young receivers, though, you're not going to be getting Worthy. They're not trading him away. Sky Moore's battled injuries, has not played at the level they thought. Sky Moore, to me, is probably the one receiver that would stand out there, but he's got 1 year left in his contract. So that impacts negotiations. And, of course, there could be other teams here. Again, the Raiders, as I mentioned, with the Pete Carroll connection, that would make a lot of sense. And I'm sure there are other teams that I could mention that are in the teens. You know, maybe Pittsburgh wants to team him up with George Pickens. I mean, there are other teams out there that I definitely could see having interest now that this is clearly a public issue when the DK Metcalf is saying, I want to play elsewhere. But those would be the 5 teams, at least based on what I've heard, the things that we do know that would make the most sense right now. And maybe Seattle plays hardball here and calls Metcalf's bluff. Maybe he ends up being on the roster in 2025. Who knows? But right now, I feel like this is a situation that's going to be difficult for them to fix, just the way that things have gone. And the Seahawks, again, they're not happy about the fact that this came out today with Tyler Lockett. They purposely announced his release separate from the other players that they cut because this was supposed to be about him. It's supposed to be celebrating an iconic Seahawk and his own teammate, his own receiver teammate, and his agency. They leaked this. And it really ruins what should have been all about Tyler Lockett. And so that may be something that the Seahawks are going to be sour about for quite some time with how respected Tyler Lockett is. There's a lot of different things at play here, but this is going to be fascinating to watch. It's certainly not going to be the first time we're going to be talking about this in coming weeks because there's going to be teams that crop up that are interested. Maybe Green Bay re-rises here. But this is going to be an intriguing storyline, one of the biggest storylines to watch heading towards free agency and the draft in the NFL.